I want to just start off by saying Happy Pride Month to everybody.
Yeah!
In case you don't know what that is, today is the 1st of June, marking the first day of Pride Month, which is just a month in which we celebrate the LGBTQ+ community and thank all the people who have made it possible for all the advancements we've made, and also just honor the people who have died by hate crimes or suffered hate crimes and died of, for example, AIDS and other things like that. So, to what extent is LGBTQ+ representation vital for queer youth in literature? I want to start off with just a few very simple and, simplified definitions to make sure that everybody's on the same page and everybody understands, at least to some extent, what's going on. So, the LGBTQ+ community, or queer people, are umbrella terms encompassing identities such as lesbians, gay, bisexuals, transgender people, and further identity labels. Straight or heterosexual people, or the term refers to people who are exclusively attracted to the opposite gender, while gay or homosexual people are exclusively attracted to the same gender. Transgender people are people who don't identify with the gender they were assigned at birth, while cisgender people do. Lastly, cishet is a term that refers to people who are cisgendered as well as heterosexual. Just to jump in, I'd like to give some statistics to make everybody aware of a problem that exists in our society. This data is regarding the mental health in the UK and the US, according to the University of Bristol and the US National Library of Medicine. Amongst the average population, or rather youth population, depression is at 15%, while suicidal ideations and attempts at 12%. However, in queer youth, that number of depression increases to 49%, and suicidal ideation and attempts to 28%. Another staggering thing is that 43% of trans youth expressed desires, thoughts, or attempts to end their lives throughout 2019, according to a Stonewall study. Clearly, there's a huge problem. But what's important to note is that mental illness isn't inherent to queerness. It just happens to be that a lot of queer people are more mentally ill because of negative experiences that we have to go through. Another thing I want to point out before continuing is that I acknowledge that some people might have differences of opinions when it comes to this topic. However, I hope that everybody can still listen and try to understand, because we all have queer people around us and people who are close to us and that we love. So I hope everybody can listen regardless of their views. The first big topic I want to talk about is normalization. Normalization is a process that occurs when society is repeatedly exposed to behaviors, values, or ideas, and thereby desensitized to them. By exposing the general public to more queerness, it would aid in the process of normalization by minimizing negative stigmas associated with the LGBTQ+ community. A quote that really impressed me is by Queer Literature in Spain, Pathways to Normalization by Alfredo Martinez Exposito. It states that to politicians and activists, normalization may mean the gaining of social rights or their legal recognition. But to a person suffering because of his or her sexuality or the discourse constructed around it, it can simply mean the desire to be normal. I think this is really important because a lot of people probably know that if you're part of a marginalized group, it's very common to feel alienized or isolated. So by exposing the general public to literature, which has always been a means of normalization and will continue to be so, the elevated mental illness rates, which are, like mentioned before, caused by outside factors of oppression and stigmatization, will probably be, or hopefully be lowered, and thereby normalization would decrease these and result in better mental health amongst the LGBTQ community, specifically the youth. The next thing I want to mention is the education of cishet people. To reiterate, cishet people are people who are cisgendered as well as heterosexual. So cisgendered people, it's very important for cisgendered people to gain an understanding of the LGBTQ+ community so they can treat us fittingly. It's also important because it's likely that if there's a deeper understanding, there will be less conscious as well as subconscious prejudice against the LGBTQ+ community. Something that made this really clear to me is when I was talking to my sister about the book, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. It's a book with a main character who's a bisexual movie star, and she has to hide her identity in order to keep up her image and her fame, essentially. My sister said that it helped her understand the difficulty of coming to terms with queerness that is still to this day very present. And while she has always been very much an ally and listened to my experiences as well as other people's, just being submerged in a book told by a queer author and retelling the tale of a queer person, although it's fictional, it helped her understand much more deeply the, again, struggle of coming to terms with queerness and what it means for a person. The last big point I want to talk about is personal development and self-acceptance. A lot of queer folks experience internalized homophobia, which is basically internalizing hatred and it turning into self-hatred because of the society or environment that you grow up in. Literature gives us an opportunity to understand and accept ourselves and explore our identities in a safe space in which we don't need to confide our vulnerability with other people, which is very important for a lot of people when they're not ready to talk about their experiences yet. I want to share another quote. This one from the New York Times article, The Healing Power of Queer Coming-of-Age Stories, by Alex Marzano-Lesnovich. They say that, I realized that what I love about queer kid media is this dream. Not only that today's children will eventually grow up in a more just world, but also that queer adults may shed some of the sorrow we've been made to carry. That we all learn to demand a world that never inflicts such sorrow in the first place. A world that always embraces who we are with joy. This quote really stuck with me because I think it's important to also end this TED Talk on a positive note and a hopeful note, because it shows that we are ready to improve and to work towards a society in which everybody can be accepted as they are. So in conclusion, in my opinion, yes, adequate representation and queer literature is quite literally vital for LGBTQ+ children growing up. So what we can do as individuals, and what we all should try to do, is demand that our libraries, whether they're local or our school libraries, provide us with enough queer literature and literature with adequate representation. What we should also do, regardless of literature, regardless of the connections to this talk, is try to create a safe space where queer peers, or just anybody really, but especially for the sake of this talk, queer people, are able and feel safe and willing to come forward with their negative experiences. We should also strive to educate ourselves so we know how to receive the experiences and how to comfort people. So I hope you learned something today, and thank you for listening.